Justin Williams, The Athletic, with us. And Justin, you and Nicole Auerbach and Scott Docterman, I think Stuart Mandel, all doing a lot of work on this House versus NCAA case. What are some of the things that jumped out at you as you worked through this and talked to sources inside that kind of gave you a roadmap for how they feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that just kind of, if you're looking at it from a historical, college sports fandom perspective, is the NCAA has spent a century kind of built on amateurism and not paying athletes and honestly kind of like marking athletes accepting payments as a scarlet letter, as completely taboo, everything that they're against. And then basically over the course of a week and really just with the announcement yesterday, basically completely switched course. And, the settlement's not finalized. Obviously, it has to go through some more legal steps, but just big picture, the NCAA that was against this for so long is now saying, yeah, we're going to revenue share. We're going to pay athletes directly, for the power conference schools that they play for. So that certainly just stands out, in a big picture sense. But the other thing as you're going through it is there's so many unknowns. There's so many questions. I'm sure you guys have been talking about it all week too. But, every person I talk to, there's, certainly I think the NCAA feels like they had to do this settlement. And I think they feel like there's some good things that'll help college sports moving forward. But even if the settlement goes through and there's, no hiccups along the way, you're talking about these massive changes. But what about NIL and collectives? What about Title IX? What about just, how this is going to work for schools that now suddenly have, potentially $20 million that they need to distribute? Or if you're a smaller school that you have $2.5 less million in your annual budget or something like that. So a huge day, a historic day yesterday for sure. But I think, we're not even close to the end of this. There's still a bunch of questions to be answered.
Absolutely, Justin. And how long do you think that schools get a chance to celebrate this? I mean, obviously it's going to be somewhat short-lived anyways, but what shoe could drop next that ends the celebration, so to speak, of these many variables that could be out there? I know there's the Fontenot case, but would it be as simple as just a player saying, I'm not going to be a part of this, I'm going to now sue too? Like, what would be the next disruption, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you have to look at is, like, none of this, like I said, is final. So they have to submit it to a judge for preliminary approval. That'll probably happen in about 30 days. It's very possible that they submit it and the judge says, yep, all this looks great. We're going to kind of move on to the next step. And, even if it takes months for it to sort out, like, everything could go fine. Or the judge could look at it in a month and say, well, these 5 things that you guys have, this all looks good to me, but these 5, they're too broad. We need to send this back. We need to redo this. So all these things that are being talked about and reported that are part of the settlement, you can start kind of conceptualizing for it, but none of it's reality yet. And we don't know if or exactly when it's going to be reality. So I think that's kind of the part that jumps out. But yeah, I think that the other part is this is all just kind of part of this ongoing debate about, the athlete employment and their employment status, or, maybe if they're going to collectively bargain without being athletes. And I think that 22% number, which is, the amount that the power conferences can distribute out of their, revenue every year to the athletes, that's going to get brought up a lot because, as you guys know, in professional leagues in America, it's usually 50% for those athletes. And college football makes more money than pretty much all of them except the NFL. And so I think someone's going to, kind of look into this and say, hey, why are the athletes, yeah, it's great that they're making money. Why are they only making 22%? Why did they have no input in kind of that decision and how much gets paid out to them? So it took care of a lot of legal issues that the NCAA was facing. It resolved some of those other antitrust cases. There is the Fontenot case that you mentioned. I think that could potentially factor in. But for me, it's just like the longer, broader view, which is, even though if this gets settled, this is not going to be the end of the NCAA's legal troubles, in my opinion.
What do you think will be the way they try to enforce these rules? I know that everything, like they keep saying, we feel it'll be able to let us do this and let us do that and let it do that. But every time they've tried to enforce rules lately, a court tells them they can't do it.
Yeah, it is interesting because you do hear that. You hear that publicly. You hear behind the scenes, which is that, this settlement's going to kind of take care of some litigation. And on one hand, I do think that's true. Again, kind of the biggest cases that we're facing them from an antitrust perspective, those are settled. Kessler and Berman, 2 of the lawyers who have kind of fought against the NCAA the hardest, they've settled this. It's almost kind of like they're stepping back and saying, all right, we're not going to come after the NCAA anymore. But there are these other cases out there. There's the Fontenot case out there. There's, potential Title IX questions and the employment stuff moving forward. all totally different, areas, all different lawyers or courts that could be brought forth with litigation. So I think there's some areas that the NCAA feels like, all right, we at least have a little clearance on this. We have a little direction. We can start doing this. But unless I'm totally missing something, or I'm certainly not a legal scholar, I just have a hard time looking at all the legal battles that the NCAA has fought and almost always lost over the past handful of years. And I just can't imagine that one settlement, even if it settles a handful of cases, is just going to put an end to all those people that have been going after the NCAA. To me, I still feel like one way or another, they're going to have some legal battles that they're going to have to face here moving forward.
What do you think about the expansion of rosters? And, of course, there would be roster limits, but, no cap on scholarships and all of that. So that to me, for the not like, there is like some good news here for the non-revenue sports, particularly baseball and softball, that I think have been really kind of screwed here for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another one of those situations where we don't have a ton of answers yet.
Mm-hmm.
That they mentioned the roster limits in the release that announced the statement, or that announced the settlement yesterday, but we didn't get any specifics or details. I actually don't think there are specifics or details yet. I think those are things that are going to have to get hammered out over the course of the settlement, probably, among the conferences themselves. And you're right. You can point to some things and say, hey, this is great that it's not 11.7, scholarships for a full baseball team or something like that. But I also think there could be some potentially concerning parts. If you're going to talk to football coaches, they're all upset because they're probably going to lose their walk-ons and they're going to have much smaller rosters. And honestly, some of that concern is genuine. Dave Clawson, the Wake Forest coach, said at ACC meetings a couple of weeks ago, like, this is not the NFL where if a guy gets hurt, you go pluck another guy off a practice squad or, pull a guy off the street to kind of replenish your roster. You basically, has to be a student, and if it's going to have to be a scholarship player, you're kind of going to start with that number at the beginning of the year and then hope that you don't have too much attrition. So that's certainly one area that, if you're a football fan, I think that could have an impact. But, in the bigger picture, there's been some talk that, hey, this settlement and the financial responsibilities that it brings, whether power conference or non-power conference, maybe there's less sports that are going to be sponsored. Maybe sports are going to get cut. And I do think that, you might have a situation where, all right, now it's 20 or 25 scholarships for a baseball or a softball team. I think there's also a concern where some schools are going to say, we have to save money somewhere, so we're getting rid of our track team or we're getting rid of our swimming and diving team. And so in some areas there could be positives. I think there's a chance that in some areas you could just completely lose sports and athlete opportunities altogether.
Justin, what is there? Did you sense relief when you talked to people, or just relief at at least we know what we think is going to happen in stage one here? I said early in the show, if we're watching Star Wars, we're at the Phantom Menace right now. We're not even he's not even Darth Vader yet.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, look, the NCAA, I was reading the tea leaves here, right? That they knew that this case was in front of Judge Wilkin, who has ruled against the NCAA on some major cases like O'Bannon and Alston. They're going against Berman and Kessler, two lawyers that they've, had some battles with and have lost cases with. So I think they stepped back and said, if we take this to trial, there's a good chance we lose. And then that's it. That's the death rattle. We're pretty much having to declare bankruptcy and shutter up the whole NCAA model. So in that sense, I think there was a relief because, in a way they get to live to fight another day for the NCAA. And even if you're talking to people, I think on the plaintiff side, look, this is a major change, right? This is schools directly paying athletes from revenue sharing. This is back payment. Some of the former high major football players could end up getting hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of this 10-year settlement period from the back pay damages. I mean, that's life-changing money for maybe some people who, didn't go on to professional careers or could certainly use that. So there's definitely some positives. And when you settle, you avoid all of the unknowns of going to trial. But on the NCAA side, I think it was kind of like, all right, we get to at least take a breather. We can get up tomorrow and keep moving forward. But they know that the fight's not done for them.
Justin, I know you're basically a lawyer at this point now, as a lot of sports writers are, but you do also still write about the on the field. And I noticed it was about a week or so ago, so it's been out there for a few days, but you had your Big 12 power rankings. I was just wondering of just how difficult of an exercise did you find that to be? I mean, there's clearly some teams that you can kind of place at the top and feel good about and rearrange and still feel pretty good about, but it is just a big ball of question marks as far as I'm concerned, this new look Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the most difficult part about doing something like that is there's 16 teams now. That's a lot of research, a lot of writing. Like I got, you get done with 8 or 10 and you realize like, oh my gosh, I still have almost half this whole thing to go. But yeah, you can look at the win totals. You can look at, just kind of the talent composition. This is probably the most parity-fueled conference among the power conferences next year. I think you could easily make a case for 8 teams, maybe as many as 10 or 11 teams that, if things go right for them, if they stay healthy, if they catch a few breaks, could be contending for a spot in the Big 12 championship game. That's like unheard of, at this level to have that many teams. Again, it's not going to end up that way when the season happens, but if you're just looking at it now, I put West Virginia 8th in my power rankings. I would not be shocked if, just like last year, West Virginia's kind of hanging around when you get into late October and November in this fight for a conference championship spot. So I think it'll be exciting. It's definitely tough, especially a few months away when players or teams are still adding players out of the spring transfer portal to know exactly what they're going to look like. A lot of these teams, I feel like quarterback health is going to have a big impact on them. Texas Tech with Baron Morton, Utah with Cam Rising, Jalen Daniels at Kansas. There's a lot of situations where, hey, if that guy's healthy and he plays a full season, they're going to be really good. And, just like the way the sport goes, if not, then it could be a struggle for them. So it was fun to kind of actually focus on the on-field stuff and dig into the rosters and see what it might look like. But to sit here and tell you that I came away with that with like a good feel who I think is going to be at the top of the conference, this coming season, that would be disingenuous of me because I think it's going to be wide open.
Justin, one of our producers, Jack, created a Big 12 games picking thing. I'll even send it to you. I'd be interested to see how you worked it out so you can go through it. I'll send it to you. But the first time I went through it, I was just looking at week by week, home and away, what I think these teams are going to be. And I didn't think about it like, what have I done for all 16 of these teams? I was just going like, oh, well, Utah should beat them then. And then I got to a point where I had Utah, Kansas at 12-0 and Kansas State at 11-1. I was like, well, that's not going to happen. But here's the thing. It could based on the way those schedules are. So, there's potential not to have that, but to have some ridiculous and all across all the conferences, a lot of 10-2s and 9-3s and 8-4s all lumped together.
Yeah, I mean, I probably think, especially, with the 12-team playoff, there's going to be an undefeated team, right? There's going to be somebody that's just kind of a juggernaut and has a great season. But the days of every power conference having an undefeated or one-loss champion at the end of the year, I think those are probably done for the most part. And again, some teams it'll be a little less stressful because you can lose 2 or 3 games and still have a chance to make the 12-team playoff. But yeah, I think we're looking at the win totals for the Big 12. Nobody, at least as of a week or two ago, nobody had double-digit wins. I think Kansas State and Utah were at 9.5. Nobody had less than, I think, 4.5 as kind of like the bottom. There was a bunch of 7.5 teams. And you're right, you start going through, and what it's probably going to end up being is it's going to be like a tiebreaker bonanza at the end of the year where you got a bunch of 7 and 6 or, 6 and 6 or whatever will end up being going into the championship weekend where it's like, well, there's a bunch of scenarios still available because I think there's going to be a bunch of teams that are really kind of clustered and close in terms of their record at the end of the year.
Justin Williams of The Athletic. Justin, enjoy what, and I told this to Pete Nakos a second ago and to Dan Lust earlier, enjoy what is hopefully a legal case-free weekend on Memorial Day.
The lawyers are taking the holiday weekend, so I'm going to take advantage of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one thing we can certainly rely on them for. So, Justin, thanks for hopping on with us, man. Certainly appreciate it. Love getting to talk to you whenever we do.
Thanks, fellas. Always appreciate you having me on.
Justin Williams of The Athletic, and we'll keep it here for our next